Yo, what's going on YouTube? It's your man Soul. Welcome back to the channel. You know what it is when you clicked it. And today we're talking about 10-man trinkets coming in Ulduar in phase 2. So without further ado, let's get right to it. Alright, so the first trinket on the list we got is the Energy Siphon coming from the Flame Leviathan. Has an equip effect and an on-use effect. Equip effect gives you 57 MP5. The on-use increases your spell power by 431 for 20 seconds on the 2-minute cooldown. Now this trinket is pretty good. 57 MP5 is good. The on-use effect is really good. It's a 2-minute cooldown, but it has a 20-second duration, so really like a minute 40. So you can get multiple uses out of this trinket, really increasing your throughput for difficult phases in a fight. And it comes from Flame Leviathan, not a terribly hard boss, right? So this trinket's pretty good. As far as like priority is concerned, I just think, hey, roll it off. No one's gonna be mad. It's Flame Leviathan. It's the first boss. Roll this bitch off. Unless somebody's really struggling in the trinket department, yeah, no one's gonna care, right? Next trinket, let's talk about. I think it's the Eye of the Brood Mother. There it is. Boom. So this trinket comes from Razor Scale, and it has 2 equip effects. The first improves your critical strike rating by 92. The second, each time you cast a damaging or healing spell, you gain 26 spell power for 10 seconds, stacking 5 times. So this is kind of like the successor to the Illustrations of Dragon Soul, right? Let me just type that in real quick. Let's see. This thing in my way is crazy. Anyway, there it is. Illustrations of Dragon Soul. Yeah, so each time you cast a damaging spell, damaging or healing, you gain 20 spell power for 10 times instead of 26, 5 times. So I won't really know which one is definitively better without Sims, right? But just face value on paper, the Eye of the Broodmother could be comparable, if not better, because yeah, it doesn't stack as high as the Illustrations. 26 times 5 is 130, so you're missing 70 spell power when you compare the 130 from the Eye of Broodmother to the 200 from the Illustrations. But Illustrations doesn't have a secondary passive. It doesn't have that critical strike rating, right? It's just the stacking spell power. Another thing going against the Illustrations is that it takes double the time, or maybe not double the time, but twice the amount of GCDs to get it to maximum stacks, right? You need 10 GCDs to get 10 stacks versus 5 to get to 5 stacks. So the Eye of the Broodmother could definitely come out on top just by merit of it takes half the time or half the cast to stack up to its maximum potential at a loss of a 70 spell power difference. So again, can't say definitively what's better, but I think the Eye of the Broodmother is going to be a contender. So when it comes out, sim it, but still a pretty decent trinket coming from one of the easier bosses. So again, you should see this kind of frequently, right? So there you go. All right, next trinket on the list we have is the Spark of Hope coming from Kolagarn. And it's not a bad trinket. It's 106 passive spirit, plus it reduces the base mana cost of your spells by 44. So for regen wise, longevity wise, it's a pretty decent trinket. However, my issue with this is that it's really only cared about by like resto druids and priests, right? Because of the meditation talent. I'm sure Editor Soul is going to put what meditation is on the screen, but if you don't know, meditation is a talent that allows 50% of your mana regen to continue while casting, and only priests have this talent. Like paladins don't have it, shamans don't have it, right? So the hard casters don't have that talent, so they really can't really make use of spirit, because spirit only happens when you're not casting. So, or not spirit only happens, spirit, the regen effect only happens when you're not casting, but you get what I'm saying. So the Spark of Hope, again, not a bad regen trinket, right? Especially when you consider the equip effect. But again, only really being good for 2 healers kind of diminishes the power in it for me. If you are having mana issues, regardless to what healer you're playing, the equip effect is still really strong, and you could pick one up and help you out. But generally speaking, I think whenever you have mana issues, the first thing you should look at is where you're overspending, because 7 to 8 times out of 10, that's the first concern of mana issues, is that you're overspending. So that being said, it is what it is. Not a bad regen trinket, but I kind of diminished my value a little bit just because it's not useful to every healer. Next trinket we have on the list is the Elemental Focus Stone coming from Araya, Crazy Cat Lady, whatever. This has 2 equip effects as well. First one is improves your hit rating by 114. The second is your harmful spells have a chance to increase your haste rating by 552 for 10 seconds. So kind of like the Embrace the Spider trinket, except it has a hit rating instead of the Embrace the Spider has spell power. Let me just double check, so I'm not lying to y'all. Here we go. Spell power. Okay, yeah, perfect. So yeah, has a little bit more haste than the Embrace the Spider proc effect, and instead of having spell power, it has hit. Now this is important because in Ulduar, as you're gonna see when you're swapping gear in and out and stuff like that, hit really comes at a higher premium, right? There's not a lot of hit going on in Ulduar gear, so this trinket having 114 hit really could help you out, especially early on when you're like making the gear swaps and you want to stay at that hit cap. This trinket is definitely going to help you because it has 114 of it. So this trinket just gets the nod from me because it has so much hit on it, and it has a pretty decent effect. Like, people love haste, so really good trinket coming from a not too difficult boss. So definitely something you should be looking out for. And yeah, that's really it for that. Now let's check I think the last trinket I have on my list for the casters section anyway is Sif's Remembrance. Boom. All right, Sif's Remembrance. This is coming from hard mode Thorum. That's why it has the 239 item level effect instead of the 225. So Sif's Remembrance has 2 equip effects. The first being increasing your spell power by 124. And then the second has, each time you cast a spell, there's a chance you will gain up to 220 MP5 for 15 seconds. So this is a really, really powerful regen trinket. The passive 124 spell power is really strong because that's almost a fourth of, you think, the unused effect with the energy siphon. I think it actually might be. We could double check that, some quick good old calculator math. So what was that, 431, right? So if we do 431 divided by 4, yeah, a little more than a fourth of the spell power gained from the energy siphon at all times. And the proc is really powerful too. Now, Sif's Remembrance is something that's really going to help you out. Like, so the regen trinkets in general, we have energy siphon, we have Sif's Remembrance, we have Spark of Hope. All share merit. Sif's Remembrance, I think, stands out because it's entirely passive. You don't really have to micromanage it. Now, my caveat with passive trinkets is that they don't always proc or activate when you want them to. That's why I never really shaded on you. Some people hate on use trinkets because it's an extra button they gotta press. I never really cared. If anything, I liked on use trinkets because I can use it at the exact moment of danger, or if I'm DPSing at the exact moment of me trying to pump. So I definitely don't shade on use trinkets, but this is a really good trinket in and of itself. 220 MP5 is phenomenal. So this is definitely going to help you, or help carry your healer's regen throughout some of the harder fights. Speaking of the harder fights, this doesn't come from a harder fight. Thorum hard mode isn't the hardest keeper out there, so you might be able to catch 1, 2, maybe even 3 of these, depending on how frequently you raid, how frequently you kill Thorum, right? So this isn't really an inaccessible trinket, so you should definitely be able to see this. But Sif's Remembrance, pretty good trinket. And that's really it for the casters. We're going to move on to the physical DPS. Alright, first trinket on the physical DPS list is the Pyrite Infuser. 1 second, let's clear that out. Coming from the Flame Leviathan. Now this has 2 equip effects, the first being improving your hit rating by 100, and the second, your chance on melee and ranged critical strike to increase your attack power by 1305 for 10 seconds. So this is a pretty decent trinket too. Now this is kind of like the same, it's like the melee version or the physical version of the Elemental Focus Stone. Has a lot of upfront hit and has a powerful proc. And like I said before, hit's going to be pretty important because when you're swapping gear in and out and you're swapping pieces, you're going to reduce your hit, right? So you want to make sure you maintain that hit cap, and having 100 hit coming from a trinket socket is pretty good. So, and the proc isn't bad either. I know I didn't really do it with the casters. Same thing with the melee. Like, I don't really want to prio it because each guild has their own loot system, their own priority system, their own way of how they divvy up gear. But if you want a blank slate, like if you're on a blank slate and you just want, like, my opinion, this trinket, since it procs off of melee and range critical hits, I look at more warriors or feral druids for this one, but there's a caveat we're going to talk about a little bit later. But overall, not a bad trinket for any physical DPS. Next trinket we have is Dark Matter, coming from Algalon the Observer. This has 2 equip effects as well. The first increases your attack power by 235. The second, your melee and ranged attacks have a chance to increase your critical strike rating by 612 for 10 seconds. So again, another powerful trinket, has 2 powerful equip effects, coming from Algalon the Observer. And Dark Matter just is a cut and dry strong trinket. There's nothing really else to say about it. I will say this, because it increases your critical strike rating, that may skew who you want to have it first, right? You want classes that benefit or have a lot of crits, like Frosty K, like Feral Druid, like Warrior, like all those classes, boast a lot of critical hits and get added effects when they critical hit. So Dark Matter might be looked at for one of them, but again, not a bad trinket at all. Coming from Algalon, it can't really be that bad, right? So Dark Matter is a pretty strong trinket. I will say this, kind of like the same thing I said with the Pyrite Infuser, and we're going to get to it with the next trinket. Depending on your loot system or how you set up loot might determine who gets this, but I'm just going to stop beating around the bush. Let's talk about the next trinket so we can actually talk about what I want to talk about, and that's the Mjolnir Runestone. Please come up. There we go. So the Mjolnir Runestone comes from hard mode Thorum. Has two equip effects. The first improves your critical strike rating by 115. The second increases your armor penetration rating by 751 for 10 seconds. So this trinket is probably what most of your physical DPS is going to be salivating over. And the reason why I was hesitant to say who's going to get the previous two trinkets is because of this trinket. So as an example, if you know for your warrior or your feral druid is lined up to get the Mjolnir Runestone, they maybe shouldn't get the first Pyrite Infuser or Dark Matter, right? Because you don't want to, the whole purpose of gear is you want to kind of spread it out. You don't want one person to have all the gear, right? You want to make sure your raid group power level is increasing more linearly than spiky, right? So with the Mjolnir Runestone, it has a lot of armor pen rating. So again, warriors, feral druids, rogues, frosty Ks, they're going to care a lot about this trinket. And like I said, depending on who you want to have this first, should maybe skew who gets the other two trinkets, right? But speaking about the trinket itself, it's a very powerful trinket, and again, it comes from Thorum, who isn't the hardest keeper to kill on hard mode. So hopefully you can get, if you have a lot of melee in your group, you can get a lot of trinkets, a lot of Mjolnir Runestones to compensate, right? So that's really it for the physical damage trinkets. Now let's move on to the tank trinkets. Alright, first up on the tank trinket list, we have the Royal Seal of King Lane coming from Yogg Saron. This has 164 stamina passively and an on-use effect of increasing your parry rating by 402 for 20 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown. Before I get to the stats and stuff of this trinket, I just want to say it's actually pretty interesting, or maybe tongue-in-cheek, that the Royal Seal of King Lane. So if you don't know who King Lane is, he was Varian Wryn's father, right? The king before Varian. And if you don't know how he died, long story short, Garona, the orc rogue that you might have seen in lore somewhere on retail or whatever, she killed him. She killed him under the mind control of, I think, the Shadow Council. But what's interesting to me is that she stabbed him, right? She stabbed him and he died. Why would they put a parry effect on somebody who died via stabbing? Clearly he didn't parry that stab. So, I don't know. Blizzard is funny. But anyway, Royal Seal of King Lane. 164 stamina, 402 parry for 20 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown. So 140 effectively after the duration. And this trinket is actually really good. I do want to say with some caveats. Number one, obviously druids cannot make the most of this trinket because they can't parry. So that's easy, right? Number two, if you're a Death Knight, I would be careful of using this trinket if you have high amounts of parry, because activating the on use could increase your parry rating, but it's just going to increase the diminishing returns on your parry, which means you're just going to take more damage. So I would be careful if you have high amounts of parry. Generally, Death Knights, we do have high amounts of parry because most of the time parry's on our gear and we get parry from forceful deflection. So just be careful. Other than that, for paladins and for warriors, pretty decent trinket. It's a pretty decent trinket all around. A lot of stamina, a lot of avoidance stat. You get frequent use out of it on its short duration, right? Short cooldown. So good trinket overall. Just be wary of some of the slights. And lastly, for the tank trinkets and the 10-man trinkets in general, is the Furnace Stone coming from Ignis. The Furnace Master has an equip and an on-use effect. The equip increases your dodge rating by 111, and the on-use increases your armor by 5448 for 20 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown. Clearly, Blizzard love 2-minute cooldowns. But anyway, this is a really good trinket. It doesn't have stamina, but it has a lot of avoidance passively and Armor is just really good for reducing physical damage. That's just the cut and dry of it. Armor is a really powerful stat for tanks because it's just flat damage reduction, and you can't really beat that. When I look at this trinket though, especially when you compare it to the Royal Seal of King Lane, it's like they made one trinket for the shield tank, for the plate tanks, and then a trinket to kind of give druids a bone. Because while any tank really can make use of this furnace stone, druids seem to gain the most out of it because of their armor modifiers, because of their use of dodge, because they can't parry, right? So the furnace stone really, it goes to any tank, but if you want to be a nice group, give it to your druid. It'll go far with them. But yeah, both tank trinkets are really good. I really didn't have too much to say about either of the tank trinkets. Both of them are really good in their respective situations. But like I said before, that's really it for the video. If you enjoyed the video, if you learned something, please hit that like and consider subscribing. It helps the channel grow a lot as we make it down the long road to 1K. I will be posting the 25-man video shortly as well, so just keep an eye out for that if you want to see the 25-man trinkets. I know most people care about the 25-man trinkets, but you shouldn't shade 10-man. You shouldn't shade 10-man because I think some really important stuff comes out of 10-man, especially now that we got the item level increase. So don't shade 10-man, but I do have the 25-man video coming up soon. And with that being said, you guys have been great. I've been Soul, and I'm out. Peace.